but there may be other issues that we have to have somebody manage, you know. Startup and breakdown. When we start up the shelter, there's a lot of chaos. People are getting set up. People are, you know, kind of figuring out their role in their home space and all of that. Again, that's an important position where the branch director is going to come into play. Once the shelter's operating and moving along pretty smoothly, it's like being the boss of anything. As long as there's no problems, you can sit back and drink coffee and play checkers or whatever you want to do until the issues come up. The other big job for the branch directors is communication. Communication up the chain to the MAC and communication down the chain through the resources you're managing. So at the top of the checklist is when you assume your position as branch director, you would need to obtain a briefing from the IC, who is the MAC, or the ops section chief if one has been assigned. So if it's a really big deal and the MAC branches out and they actually assign an ops section chief, then the branch director would be reporting to the ops section chief. If there is no ops section chief, you're reporting to the MAC manager or the person designated by the MAC manager, the IC. Identify the resources that have been assigned to your shelter. So you need to know who's operating under your roof. So is Red Cross here, is DOT here, is MRC, is Aries, who have I got working here? And you need to know who those folks are and who their point of contact is. So you have to kind of, you know, maneuver the field and find out who's in charge of that group, and who do I need to speak to and communicate with. Reviewing the group assignments and modifying them if necessary. Again, a little bit of ICS here, but a 204 would be generated if an incident action plan is developed, a written incident action plan for the shelter, which we do have them. They're pretty generic. Typically operates the same way every time. But for some reason, we need to modify the group assignment. So Aries, the communication group, normally is in this room at the shelter, and that's normally their house, and that's where they work. Well, the power's out in that room, or they were renovating that room, and it's out of service now. So that's something that the branch director would have to find something else in the shelter that would accommodate those folks. All right, so that's reassigning group assignments. We wouldn't reassign, you know, Red Cross to deal with the pets, or, you know, MRC to deal with snow plowing. We wouldn't do that. That's outside of their scope of work. If you make a modification to the assignments, and it's a large modification, moving someone from a room to a different room is not what we consider a large modification. But if you had something that was worthy, that it should be moved up the chain so that the MAC knows. And something, an example of that might be, you were expecting food services to deliver food services within the shelter, the normal cafeteria staff, but the normal cafeteria staff didn't show up. All right, so okay, we got a problem now. We have to get food some other way. That's a major change in the operation. That would have to go up the chain to the MAC to say, listen, we don't have food service here at the shelter. We have to go to Plan B. You know, here's what I think. What do you have for options for me? That's a major change. Major change, plus it could be a safety issue. You know, are we going to be able to stay here? All of that. Major change. Good. It's important for the branch director to recognize the structure around the operation. Not only your shelter, but what else is going on, how many other shelters are open, who's doing what, kind of situational awareness. And situational awareness around your shelter. You know, is this storm really bad where you are, or is it not so bad? It's worse up Cape, it's worse down Cape, but we're in the middle here, not so bad. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do you have city power? Do you not have power? Are you on generator? Your logistics in place? Are they managing to take care of you? Those kinds of outside the doors of your shelter, but certainly logistical structure that you need to be aware of. Who's doing the plowing? We're all regional shelters, and some of them are set up in such a way that, like, the plowing is spread around just like our public safety assignments. So even though the shelter is in DY, Dennis may be doing the plowing for the next 24 hours, and then Yarmouth does the plowing for the following 24 hours. Maybe, I don't know. But that organizational structure around the shelter you need to be aware of. Who's the IC for the town the structure is in? Because that's important. Do they have an EOC open? Do they have an EMD, an emergency management director? Is the police chief, the fire chief, a captain, somebody assigned to the structure within the town that you're operating in? Because they're going to have some say about what goes on too, obviously. All right? So just situational awareness. One of the first things you need to do as the branch director is set up some kind of operational briefing with your groups, with the groups who you're supervising and taking care of. They need to know, because don't forget, and a lot of folks in this room have worked the shelters in the groups, so they understand how this goes. You're busy doing your thing. You're kind of oblivious to the outside world a little bit about especially what's going on outside the shelter. So it's really important for the branch director to communicate on a briefing with everybody, the point of contacts from each of your groups in the room, so you can speak to them about what you expect today, what's going on, what you expect them to do, what you expect them to report to you, how we're going to communicate with each other. Are we using radios? Are we doing face-to-face? How are we doing this? So that ops briefing needs to happen as quickly as you can, either prior to the shelter opening or right after it opens, where you can collect those folks together, right? So an operational briefing with your folks who are working with you. If you have the time and space, you can invite the whole gang in and do the ops briefing. But typically I would recommend that you take the leaders of the groups, bring them in, maybe an assistant or two, and do it on a small scale. And then once you've got that all dusted out, then maybe do a general briefing to all of the staff that are in the operation. That makes them feel included, and they're in part of the game, and they understand what everybody else is doing. Adjust work assignments of the groups if needed. Sometimes some groups are really small and some groups really big. So you may do some manipulation of work assignments within the shelter itself. All right? Especially the assistant groups, like the AmeriCorps kids, the CERT guys and girls. Those are the ones who really become the back labor of the shelter operation. So probably those are the kinds of groups you're going to really need to manipulate to get the most bang for the buck out of those folks, and make sure that we're not beating up on them either. Resolving logistical problems, probably going to be the thing you're going to do the most. Hey, we're out of toilet paper in the men's room. Okay, so Mr. Branch Director, we're going to move and find the facilities group. Hey, can you get us some toilet paper? That kind of thing. The food really stinks. You're going to go to the food group and say, hey, the food is awesome, but you think you could change it up a little, or whatever it is. Logistical things. Monitoring communications. You should be monitoring the internal communications, and typically we do that by radio. In most of our shelters, we have a radio comms set up within the shelter, so you can do it that way. But I think most cases, shelters are not so big that you can't do face-to-face with people most of the time, unless it's an emergency or we're really spread out and it's really busy. But monitoring communications within the shelter, but also monitoring communications external of the shelter. Now that may mean that you have to check in with the Aries guys, once an hour, or however you're comfortable, to find out what the outside chatter is going on, what's going on at the other shelters, all those kinds of things. Ensure resources are in play. The AmeriCorps kids showed up in a van of 12 of them, and they've been sitting over in the corner there for the last 3 hours. Well, how come? Well, they probably didn't get assigned to something. So, you know, your job as the branch director is to make sure all of the assignments are filled. So, you know, is Red Cross sheltering people? Is Dot and LCAS sheltering pets? The Aries guys got radios going. Make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if somebody is out of play, either put them in play or release them. Maybe you don't need them. Hey, you know, Mike up at the MAC, we have 12 AmeriCorps kids who we've used for unloading the crates and boxes, but we really don't have a good use for them right now. Can you use them somewhere else? And they get redeployed somewhere else. Or American Red Cross maybe has 25 volunteers who showed up to the DY shelter, but the clientele is all down at the Nauset shelter. So you could speak to them, maybe they could redistribute resources, those kinds of things. Make sure the resources are being used correctly. Requesting additional resources. We don't have enough AmeriCorps kids. We don't have enough Red Cross folks. We don't have enough DOT LCAS folks. Move that up the chain. Now, some of that happens internally within their groups, but they may get to a point where they say, hey, we're out of luck, we don't have any more resources, and then come to you and say, you know, we need help with backfilling that resource. Report to the MAC whenever you think there's a need to speak to somebody at the MAC. Pick the phone up, the radio, pigeon, whatever you're going to use. Talk to the guys and the girls up at the MAC. They should have and do have the big situational awareness picture. So if something's going bad for you, it's quite likely that it's going bad for somebody else too, and they already probably even know about it. Or maybe you're the first one to let them know, and then they can start planning, because if it's happening to you, it's going to happen to somebody else. So that communication is vital, as always. Yep. We did that already. Okay, so some of the things that we would have to or need to report up to the MAC just by rote. If the IAP is modified, that's the incident action plan. If you have a written incident action plan and it is modified to some degree beyond changing somebody's name or telephone number, that should go up the line. I should say we don't always, not that we should, but we don't always have a written IAP in place yet. We're working toward that. It's a goal. Someday it'll happen. But in the meantime, report to the MAC whenever additional resources are needed, even if the resources are being provided by that resource that you're supervising. So you go to LCAS and say, or they came to you and said, look, we need more dog crates. But we think we know we can get them, or we think we know we have some. So we're going to try to get them. If we don't manage, then we're going to come back to you and ask for additional resource, right? That would need to be brought up. Surplus resources are available. The AmeriCorps kids, we worked them. We don't have any more jobs for them. You move that up the chain to the MAC, and they would reassign them. Hazardous situations occur. The leak in the roof at the DY became a very hazardous situation. That certainly needs to be moved up the chain, because what could that lead to? The closing down of the shelter and moving on to somewhere else. So that is going to be a big deal, right? So that's something that would definitely need to go up the chain. Oop. And any other significant events occur. So that, you know, dream it up, whatever happens. Martians land in the backyard. Meteor hits the shelter. What is it? Anything else? We talked about this a little already, but maintaining awareness of what's happening in the other shelters or the other branches. Again, if you got a problem, either they've had the problem or they're going to have the same problem. That's typically how it goes. The big things, you know, food, right? What kind of food are we able to generate for these things? and how we're doing it. Moving people in and out, how are we doing with that? That's always a logistical nightmare that the shelter itself doesn't typically have to manage the movement of the people to and from the shelter physically. You may have to manage the process of which they are released and that kind of thing, kind of demobilization of the shelter, checkout, intake. But the physical moving of folks, either by buses or by police cars or by fire trucks or whatever it is, that's typically handled at the MAC level. Attend the planning meeting with the MAC as needed. The MAC is going to go through a planning cycle, which they're going to have their tactics meeting, their operations meeting, their planning meeting, and then they're going to develop the IAP, just like a normal ICS structure. So when they are in there or doing their planning meeting, they are going to want to talk to the branch director from the shelter to get the input and the situational awareness about what's happening at that location, right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And then this one's very important because obviously at the end of the shift, everybody likes to, I'm out of here, So just like at work for a lot of us, the incoming and the outgoing shift, it's really good if the incoming person shows up a little early so that the outgoing guy or girl doesn't have to stay a little late, so you can get that debrief and change of command, if you will, over and done with, and nobody's losing any sleep over it. So a good debriefing with the incoming branch director. Hey, these are the problems we had. This is what I did about them. These problems have been moved up to the MAC. These issues are being dealt with by the resources in the building. It's all good. I'll see you in a week. Whatever it's going to be. Don't sleep under the window because it leaks. And then another important one is we don't necessarily have a finance section within the shelter, so the branch director becomes the finance section chief. So any, let's see, how am I going to put this so it doesn't get misconstrued? Any large financial issues would be dealt with the branch director. But on top of that, we should be managing the resources to manage their financials. In other words,